Welcome, Fintech Talkers, to another edition of the Fintech Talk Show, recorded at Money 2020 in Las Vegas. This is Patty, and my guest today is Jean Mies from PPRO. It's the payment pros you probably have not heard about, but should. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with some introduction. So I kind of joked about it that PPRO is not some thing people have heard, or at least my audience, I should say. So why don't you introduce yourself, Jean, and talk a little bit about PPRO as well.
Wonderful, I'll do that. So I'm the general manager for the Americas at PPRO. I joined the company around almost 2 years ago. Been working in the payments industry for a long while with different companies, including akin in the past. And so PPRO, like you rightfully said, is we're a payments company that probably a lot of people don't know yet. And what we do is we are a provider of payments infrastructure for businesses such as acquirers, banks, PSPs. And we provide a wide range of solutions, spanning from digital payments or local payment methods, but also more and more other services like risk management services, compliance, even acquiring platform as a service across the globe. We have a platform that integrates all solutions seamlessly and orchestrates those solutions to big companies.
Great, it's great, and we're at Money 2020, so we should kind of talk a little bit about that. And I know, Jean, your focus, you're in Brazil. You're probably one of the first persons that I've interviewed from Brazil. So it's great to talk. But talk a little bit about how Money 2020 has been. And also there's a lot of focus, at least I saw some focus. There was, I think, a track on LATAM Fintech and LATAM payments. So talk a little bit about that as to why that is important now.
Of course. As a matter of fact, yes, Latin America is an extremely interesting, dynamic market. On Sunday, on the first day of the Money 2020, I was on stage talking about payments trends and industry trends. And why is it interesting? Because simply the growth dynamic in Latin America is huge, right? It's one of the fastest growing e-commerce markets around the globe. A lot of things have happened in the recent years in terms of financial inclusion. So, both from a regulatory perspective, but also from a technical solution perspective, especially during the pandemic. As you can imagine, a lot of people have started buying online, people who have never used or consumed on the internet before. And this is now a consistent trend, right? So now, across Latin America, a large portion of the population has access to financial services. So with digital bank accounts, electronic payment methods. And this is why over the entire region, e-commerce has been growing double digits, up to 70% in some markets year over year, right? And this not only brings a lot of opportunities for companies, for global companies that want to expand their customer base across different regions. So Latin America is one of the biggest consumer markets as a consolidated region in the world, but also brings a lot of complexities. And this is what I spoke about on Sunday. So telling a little bit about what do you have to expect when you want to do business in Latin America. So you need to know your way around.
So let's peel that onion a little bit. So Latin America is a block. Obviously, there are several countries. So let's kind of define which countries. Are we talking entire from all the way Mexico all the way to Argentina, or is a subset of that? And regulatorily, are they similar, different, very different? And as a payment provider to financial institutions or acquirers, what are some of the complexities that you have to be aware of?
So if you think about Latin America, there are a few markets that are really dominant in terms of consumer power and e-commerce importance. Brazil, Mexico, Colombia are the biggest markets there. Brazil is by far the largest market. So an estimated $40 billion of e-commerce volume last year, a year-over-year growth of around 30%. Like I said, e-commerce becoming more and more important. So to give an idea, only 3 years ago, e-commerce represented around 5% of total retail sales. This has more than doubled to 12% these days. It's still relatively small, but if you look at the growth dynamic, it's really impressive over such a small period of time. Mexico is on a similar streak, so it's really growing very, very fast. The interesting thing about those two markets specifically is that overall banking penetration, card penetration is still comparatively low, right? If you put it in a global context. But if you look at e-commerce only, how people consume things on, online, most of the consumption there is being done with credit cards, right? And this, of course, is also favored by the fact that more and more people are now using electronic payment methods. Around 65% of all consumers in a market like Brazil, the biggest market, have used or have made or received an electronic payment in the last year, which is unheard of before. But at the same time, the big complexity in those markets, not only Brazil, Mexico, but also the other markets, Argentina, Colombia, and so on, is that there are big differences in terms of consumer preference, how people like to pay for their items online. So, how the payment patterns per se. For instance, paying in installments is very, very popular in Latin America. So people buy an item and then they pay it over 12 months, right? So if you will, in Latin America, this whole buy now, pay later mode was invented more than 10 years ago, right? So it's really, really very interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah. So innovators, but maybe didn't market or brand it like folks here did, and BNPL became kind of such a big thing, especially that Square Afterpay merger last year. I think that was one of the big ones. But obviously there are other firms like Affirm and all are doing well. But interesting. So you talked about e-commerce as the one big use case, but when I look at other payment providers, there's obviously a bunch of other use cases, and they might cross-border e-commerce too. I don't know whether that's in kind of scope or is that kind of a growth area. But remittances is another thing, collections, and also the big kahuna is sometimes B2B payments, which banks do, and kind of providing alternative rails or alternative ways to do. So does PPRO kind of cover all that, or is e-commerce kind of the main use case?
E-commerce is definitely the main use case for PPRO in Latin America and also elsewhere around the world. But cross-border, as you mentioned, is extremely important, right? This is one of our big revenue streams globally, and especially in Latin America, for the reasons that I mentioned before. So Latin America as a region is growing extremely fast, and more you see consumers in Latin America buying online, even outside of the Latin American borders, right? And this is why you see more and more international e-commerce powerhouses expanding into Latin America. So starting with all the big American companies like Amazon that established operations in Latin America, Brazil, and Mexico a few years ago, but also all the Asian powerhouses like AliExpress, Shopee, and all the others that nowadays have some of their biggest consumer bases in Latin America. So cross-border e-commerce is extremely important and still growing at higher rates than traditional, local e-commerce. If you look at the growth rates of a company like Amazon, for instance, you will see that their growth rate within their national borders is round about 40% year over year. Outside of the US, they're growing 60%. So they're being challenged in their home turf, and they need to expand more and more, to continue growing consistently like that. And like I said, Latin America is a very important region for those kind of companies.
Right. So going back to the point around localization, you talk about customer preferences are different across the countries. Obviously, payment rails and kind of individual and maybe some regulatory aspects. And we want to get to the regulatory maybe next round or talk to you about that. But in terms of preferences, how do you solve for that? Kind of as a technology stack, it requires a lot of customization, or that seems like your mode, right? You kind of localize it for the banks, for the consumers. So, but how do you do that?
Yeah, I think that you touched on a very important point. I think that the essential thing, let's put it that way, for you to be successful as a company in Latin America is that you need to understand the local specificities of the market, the local preferences. And it's extremely difficult, even for large global enterprises, to do that without the help of a company that deeply understands those specific complexities, right? And this is the way how we solve for that is that we have over time set up teams across the globe that bring in this local expertise and knowledge. And then we, of course, connect in each of the market with the most relevant payment methods, with the providers there that really make a difference in terms of share of wallet and consumer preferences. And then as a technology company, as a fintech, we also focus on efficiency. So it's not only about connecting with certain payment methods or solutions, it's about optimizing and obtaining the best results, right? If you're looking at payments specifically, you will always look at, conversion rates, authorization rates, fraud rates. You want to keep them low, etc. And this is what we do for global enterprises. So we really solve the complexities of the different markets. So we translate them so that global enterprises understand what they need to focus on, what they need to offer. And then we optimize it using technology and local resources, right? You mentioned regulation. So from a regulatory perspective, a lot has changed over the years across the Latin American region. So in the past, all countries in Latin America, they used to be very heavily concentrated from a banking perspective. Only a few banks dominating, in the entire markets, basically. And around 10 years ago, and that's quite a long time already, some of the central banks across the region, mainly in Brazil and Mexico, have started moving against this huge concentration that existed. So really breaking up the market and creating a scenario from a regulatory perspective that incentivizes the entrance of new players, right? This came together with, the appearance of fintechs, companies that were challenging the large banks and saying, hey, we can do this better. We can be closer to what the customer expects because we have technology, right? And since then, a lot really has changed. So the whole payments industry has evolved incredibly. So nowadays, some of the Latin American markets are among the most innovative payment markets in the world. And I'll give you an example. One trend that we have seen emerging since a couple of years now is the emergence of instant payment methods. And you may have heard about that, right? There's a payment method in Brazil called Pix. Pix was launched in November 2020. It's a 24/7, 365 instant payment method, maybe similar to what you experience when you use Venmo, right? So you just make a transfer, it gets to the account of the other person instantly. But the big advantage is that not only is a payment method like Pix completely bank agnostic, so you don't have to have an account at a specific bank. You don't even need a bank account. You can use it with any wallet that is integrated with the Pix system, and it's free of cost. So imagine in a 230 million people country like Brazil, where there's a lot of difference in terms of income, right? So if people have easy access to that kind of technology at low cost, it becomes an instant success. And this is what has happened in Brazil in the last not even 2 years in terms of adoption of this payment method. Nowadays, more than 130 million Brazilians are using Pix on a day-to-day basis to, pay for their items online or even in store. Today, almost 1 trillion Brazilian reais, so that's around about 200 billion US dollars, are being processed every month. And this is still growing extremely. So, and why am I saying that this is super innovative? Because the PIX model and the technology is being used now more and more in other countries, not only across the region, but also in other regions, because of its huge success, right? Because it's, like I said, it's completely agnostic, bank agnostic, it's interoperable. So it's a huge case of success.
Right. So on the PIC, so you said you don't need a bank account. I like that financial inclusion piece of things because that's a big deal. I mean, even in the US, definitely in Asia, but I'm sure in South America or Latin America as well. So the acceptance of that PIX wallet without an account, it has critical mass, meaning merchants and other people and e-commerce that will accept that as widely accepted.
Absolutely. So PIX started as a peer-to-peer payment method, but now more and more it's being adopted by merchants as well, right? Because like I said, it's convenient to use, it's easy accessible very easily, it's free of cost for the consumer, right? And even for the merchant, it is cheaper than using a card, right? The fees that you pay as a merchant are much lower, right? And this is a formula for success for sure. Now, the expectation is that it will continue growing and also that additional functionality will be available. Like I said, in Latin America, it's very common to pay in installments, right? But so far, it is only possible to pay in installments if you're using your card. Now, the PIX technology will also be expanded and launched by the central bank to accommodate for that. So you'll be able to pay for your, purchases or services using PIX and then pay in months, which is great, which is, hits the nerve of what is really important in a region like Latin America.
Oh, that's great. I should check it out. I am familiar with some things like this, like I think UPI in India is similar. They have biometric payments and things like that, and very economic. So it's kind of very democratic. Kind of the street merchants can use it without having pay a lot of interchange and all. So fascinating that it's picking up, or that mode's picking up. It's not good news for some of the associations and stuff, but that it is the way it is. So like you touched on the regulatory aspect a little bit, the customer preference or the localization aspect. If I kind of ask you what keeps you up at night, or where do you spend the most time?
So I'm going to mention one aspect, risk or fraud management. In any situation where you see almost exponential growth of e-commerce, which of course brings a lot of opportunities, you also see a lot of challenges, right? Because financial inclusion in Latin America is relatively recent. People are not as experienced in using electronic payment method or buying online. And of course, fraudsters know that and they take advantage of that. And this is why Latin America now these days is the region that has the most fraud incidents globally in e-commerce, right? So every fifth transaction, so 20% of all transactions in Latin America are fraudulent. And this rate has been growing year over year. So 23% growth over the years in fraud-related incidents. Now, what does that mean for any company that is, targeting Latin America as a market? Well, you need to know how to mitigate your fraud risk, your financial risk in those markets, right? And there are many ways how you can do that. And what we always advise is, well, first of all, use the benefits of technology and data to your advantage, right? So that means focus on using tools, fraud mitigation, fraud management tools that are efficient in the region, right? Because like we discussed previously, the payment patterns are pretty specific in the region. So the more you are adapted in terms of fraud prevention, the better. And combine the technology aspects like the risk management, like authentication of transactions via, authentication protocols or biometric or two-factor authentication. And the more you can combine those with data points that add information about the consumers, like ID checks, credit checks, the more you will be able to control your risk exposure and mitigate the risk of suffering fraud, right? At the same time, what is maybe also very specific for the Latin American region is the fact that you need to work very, very closely with the local banks. So you need to have a constant dialogue to understand transaction flows, to understand fraud patterns, and to be able to send cleaner transactions over to the banks. And the more you do that, the more you clean up your transactions, the higher, the better your results will be at the end of the day. And then the last item that I want to highlight is the fact that since you have so many different flavors from a payments perspective, e-commerce payment perspective, you need to use this as to your advantage as well. So the more you expand your payments mix by using, payment methods that are sometimes more prone to fraud and others that are less prone to fraud. For instance, instant payment methods, they're relatively secure. They have lower fraud incidence than cards, for instance. And the more you use this mix of payment methods, the more you will be able to balance your risk as well, risk exposure, and to get the best results in such a big market.
Very cool. And risk, no wonder, man, I didn't know the numbers were pretty staggering, that there's so many frauds, but I think that's common across markets. Kind of segueing from that into crypto and metaverse and Web3 and CBDCs and stablecoins, and it's kind of a lot of flavors, right? But kind of clubbing them all together. Obviously they come with their own risk, but they come with their own kind of benefits as well. We're in sort of a crypto winter now, but are you doing anything in crypto and Web3 and metaverse?
We do up to a certain point. So when we develop solutions as a fintech, we always hear what our customers expect from us in terms of demand. What are the demands that they want to satisfy? And these days we see that crypto processing, crypto payments are a nascent trend, right? So we do, of course, have not only from a client perspective, companies that offer cryptocurrency. So we help those companies to allow customers to buy cryptocurrency using traditional payment methods, alternative payment methods, card, etc., and so forth. At the same time, we also help companies to offer cryptocurrencies to buy assets or to buy goods and services, right? And this is still, like I said, very early stage, very nascent. So the use case to use cryptocurrency in day-to-day transaction is not quite there yet. We're moving in that direction, also with Web3 becoming more and more of a topic, but we're not quite there yet. So from that perspective, we always say, let's listen what our consumers, our customers, merchants are asking for, and then we'll focus on it. But it will happen, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, no, we have some guests, especially on the metaverse, and maybe I'll ask you a question on that too. So the kind of projection is that e-commerce is going to go, and they call it phygital commerce and things like that, physical and digital, so to speak. So the experience of buying a good especially consumer goods, could potentially change. And yeah, there's the fulfillment or the payment component of it. And so basically e-commerce moving to the metaverse. Any thoughts on that? And how prevalent is that in Latin America? I know predominantly it's not like people are buying shoes or clothes in the metaverse just yet. I mean, I think Nike and all want to have people do that and have a different experience, but it's predominantly gaming, right? There's a lot of in-game purchase and things like that. Do you touch on that, or do you serve that market as well?
I have to say, from a personal perspective, this is a topic that really intrigues me. I'm the father of a 16-year-old boy, and you can imagine how much time he spends in front of his computer gaming, right? So I'm deeply intrigued by that. And of course, I follow closely, the trends that I see happening there. Now, from a professional perspective, to answer your question, right now it's too early. We see first signs of this becoming a big thing, and like you said, large brands spending time thinking about how can we capitalize on the metaverse and how can we use this right to be closer to the younger generation. But also here it's very nascent, and from our perspective, it's not something big yet. But of course, we consider ourselves to be innovative, and we are keeping our antennas sharp to see what's going to happen in this market. And if the demand is there, we will surely satisfy the demand that is growing.
Yeah, no, it is an area to be watched. There's obviously a lot of players doing it, but given the macroeconomic situations, things are a little bit slow, but definitely an area to be watched. So thank you so much, Jean. But to kind of start wrapping up, FinTech Talk, the audience, we have a global audience. We started with kind of more US, North American audience, but recently I think I was seeing some ranking. We're like 12th in Singapore and UAE and India. So we have a global audience. Hopefully with you, we'll have a lot of South American audience as well. And we're on Apple and Spotify and things. What do you want to say to that global audience, especially people who are looking to partner with you, potential customers? I know your customers are kind of more banks and others, but if there are people listening and they want to reach out to you personally or partner with PPRO, what's your message for that?
I think the main message here is maybe repeating a little bit what I said before. So the trend that we're seeing is that e-commerce is becoming more and more global. Of course, this is not a new thing, right? We've seen that evolving over time, but it's picking up in speed. And that has to do with the fact that some markets are more saturated, are more mature, and other markets are way less. If you look into Latin America, if you look at the Asia Pacific region with India and so on, there's many opportunities there for global enterprises to grow and to expand their customer base and so on. So my recommendation is definitely be mindful of the specific customer patterns, behaviors, preferences across the different regions, and be open to expanding. So we help many companies to expand into regions where they don't necessarily have local legal entities, where they want to test out the market, see the consumers, understand if it makes sense to set up shop right before they actually do so. And this is what I recommend. So if you're a company interested in expanding, let's have a chat. Let's talk to us. We will definitely be able to support you with that. But be mindful that it's, payments have many different flavors. In Latin America, we have many flavors. So just be mindful of that and rely on the expertise of specialized companies.
Yeah. So how can people get in touch with you? Like, you want to leave your LinkedIn, Twitter, or what's your favorite place that you are in?
Yes, absolutely. I can definitely share my LinkedIn. It's Jean Mies. You'll be able to find me there. Or you can also contact me by email. It's first name, last name, jean.mies@ppro.com. Pretty easy. So send me an email if I can help you.
So that's JEAN.MEIS. Yeah, and on LinkedIn. So thank you, Jean. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for coming on the FinTech Talk Show and sharing your perspective about this big Latin American fintech and payments market.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.